Story 1. My dad punished me at 12 by making me disrobe and putting me out in front of the house, saying, "You don't own anything, not even your clothes." That one scarred me deeply. Story 2. Food scarcity and witnessing my parents struggle to pay bills motivated me to ensure my pantry is always stocked and that I have money saved. Story 3. In 1998, it was a snow day. My parents went to work and my sister and I stayed home. I went out with my friends to play in the snow. We had a pond that froze over and you could walk on it. A friend of mine fell in and we couldn't reach him. We were only 8 years old. I ran to my house and told my sister to call for help. We ran back to him, but he wasn't there anymore. Emergency services arrived, and we watched as they pulled his body from the pond. Story 4. I was around 10 or 11 when my mom tried to stop drinking during my summer visits with her. I was supposed to stay for 2 months. On about the third day, she had a seizure, vomited blood everywhere, and passed out. None of the neighbors would answer the door, and I remember running frantically, trying to find someone to help me. My mom didn't have a phone either, so I came home and lay down over her body, screaming and crying for what felt like an eternity, thinking she was dead. Eventually, she woke up and started organizing things in the house as if nothing had happened. After that episode, she spiraled further into addiction, spending most of her 30s in group homes and getting kicked out repeatedly because she refused to stop drinking. After about 5 more years, she was so far gone that she couldn't even have a coherent conversation. She had gained 200 pounds, her skin had turned a frightening yellow, and she had to use a walker to get around. She thought I was still a baby and that the government had taken me away from her. I had to explain repeatedly that I was her son and now 15, 16, or 17 years old. She finally passed away at 39, when I was 18 and a month into university. Watching her slowly end her own existence throughout my formative years was incredibly tough, and I never really recovered. I won't even start on my dad, who was a methamphetamine user and spent half his life in prison, becoming fanatically religious in his later years, or my sister, who has cerebral palsy. Sometimes I'm amazed that I'm still here. Story 5. My alcoholic father decided to teach me how to tell time. Every time I made a mistake, he hit me. Each lesson ended when my nose was bleeding. It took me 15 years to finally learn to tell time on my own because every time I looked at a clock, I froze in terror. Story 6. When I was 3, a small dog bit my lower lip, and I had to get it surgically repaired. Since then, I feel safer around larger dogs than smaller ones. Story 7. Watching my dad throw his glass filled with vodka at my mom after she started yelling at him for giving me alcohol when I was 4 years old, and then having to comfort my mom while she cried in the bedroom. Story 8. My dad had cancer when I was 15 and then passed away 5 years later. This experience affected me deeply. He should still be here. Story 9. I had a severe case of pneumonia when I was 5 and had to stay in the hospital. The nurse mixed up my chart with another child's who had spinal meningitis. I received many unnecessary medical treatments. As an adult, I experienced a lot of unexplained pain, and I believe that is the reason. Story 10. Oh, I have a buffet of options. My mother slept until the late afternoon, so my sister and I would use chairs and other furniture to get our food or unlock the chain to go play in the apartment complex's playground. My mother went to prison but was said to be on vacation in Florida, and no one knew when she would come back. My biological father told me the only father I had was God and that I should never call him that. Dad was acceptable. I was spied on by my stepbrother when I was forced to change in a photo studio. I watched horror movies when my caregivers would watch them, including titles like Jurassic Park, Scream, Child's Play, and Deep Blue Sea. Both biological parents voluntarily terminated their parental rights so a toxic relative could adopt me for financial gain. I was warned that if I told anyone what I saw, I would be called a liar, and no one would believe me. I was told it was my fault the kitten I got died in a thunderstorm. I was going to try for 10, but this is exhausting, so 8 will have to do. Story 11. I witnessed my dad holding my mom down on their bed with his hands around her throat. She told me to get help. I tried 2 other apartments, but it was late and everyone was sleeping. I went back home, and my mom quickly took me back out the door with two pillowcases in hand. She tried the truck, but my dad removed something so it wouldn't start. We ran and hid behind a store and watched him driving around the parking lot looking for us. I remember my mom using a payphone in the store to call her sister. I was 7 at the time. There's not a day that has gone by that I haven't thought about it. Story 12. Abusive parents passed away in an accident, leaving me to care for my siblings at 17. A relative stole from us, and a reporter hounded us, causing severe social anxiety. I was also conned by people I considered family, suffered a concussion, all while dealing with undiagnosed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Good times. I am in a better space now, and most importantly, I feel safe. Story 13. My kindergarten teacher was a miserable old woman who was verbally abusive to me. I still struggle with saying sorry or apologizing unnecessarily because of that. Story 14. I still remember my dad drop-kicking a pan of spaghetti in the kitchen when I was about 4 years old. I think he did it because my mom had made it 2 nights in a row. I ran to my room and wiped my mouth on my blanket. I still have that blanket, and it still has the spaghetti stain. Story 15. One day, when I was 7 or 8 years old, my older cousin told me there was a real dinosaur egg buried in the backyard. I was very excited, thinking I might be raising a stegosaurus. I started digging every day after school with a spoon for about a week. I got blisters and ruined half of the flower bed. Then my cousin finally told me it was just a potato he buried to mess with me. I cried. I am not ashamed. That thing felt like my future pet. Story 16. I listened to my brother being punished by our father when he refused to go on a carnival ride after our mother spent money buying him a ticket. I was probably 5 years old, and I can still hear his screams after 60 years. Story 17. I was molested by my brother's friend and by my mother's boyfriend at different times. I was also abused by my mother. My brother once said, "I hate you," while his hand was around my throat. That moment has stayed with me because I think he meant it. Story 18. I am torn between being a witness to my mother's attempt at suicide or her relinquishing my custody to the state. Story 19. I unfortunately have to claim the creepy uncle title at age 3. I am good now and have used my story to help others rather than dwell in the past and let it haunt me. It was definitely traumatizing, especially since it's the first memory I have, while most of my childhood memories are wiped clean from my mind, suppressing that one until I was 14. Story 20. My oldest brother almost drowned me in our small kiddie pool when I was between 4 and 6 by forcing me down and sitting on my head under the water. It is quite a memory to have, and it caused me to have an extreme fear of anyone touching me or getting too close to me in a body of water. I recently learned how to swim, about 2 years ago, after my fiancée, the only person I trust near me in water, helped teach me because I wouldn't freak out when he touched me to assist in my learning. Story 21. Nothing damaged my self-worth more. It's unbelievable how it has been a burden on my soul that I would give anything to have not experienced. However, I wonder what kind of person I would have been if I hadn't endured that abuse. Story 22. At the age of 6 or 7, I helped slaughter a sheep without realizing what I was doing. My uncle had multiple sclerosis affecting his vocal cords, making it difficult for me to understand him. He gestured for me to hold the sheep by its mouth while he used a knife to slice its throat. I watched as life and blood drained away, slowly realizing what had just happened. It was the first time I witnessed an animal die. Afterward, I assisted in cutting up the sheep, removing the parts we didn't want and putting them in the back of the truck to discard later. That night, we had sheep for dinner, but I couldn't eat. Even now, I struggle when handling raw meat while preparing meals. I can still vividly recall the moment the sheep's eyes glazed over, the terrified expression fading, over 30 years later. It was shocking. I wasn't accustomed to farm life. I grew up in the suburbs. Story 23. After returning home for the 3rd consecutive day from 6 straight hours of bullying and receiving no support from faculty, my mom advised me to handle it on my own because she was tired of contacting the school to file a complaint. This experience shaped the tone for the rest of my life. Story 24. Being taken to a funeral home at age 7 and seeing a real deceased person for the first time was impactful. I work in the medical field now, and deceased individuals still unsettle me. Story 25. There was an old game scene that my cousin played when I was 5, featuring a baby crying while a mother shouted, "Leave them alone!" At the end of the level, you discover the mother and baby dead, with the child's blocks scattered around, indicating they have become ghosts. That was the first time I experienced a panic attack, and I still feel anxious when I hear a crying baby. Story 26. My father made my brother and me cry on our knees in front of his wife so she wouldn't leave him. Sometimes I hate him for it. Story 27. During my teenage years, I was beaten unconscious by bullies, and no one took action. Instead, the school expelled me and forced me to transfer to another one. My parents attempted to press charges, but the perpetrators somehow avoided facing consequences, and I still don't understand how that happened. Story 28. Being stared at and catcalled, along with other uncomfortable experiences with men starting at age 10, has left a lasting impact. Although I have never been raped, the frequency of these incidents has greatly affected me. When discomfort becomes constant, it truly adds up. Story 29. It's not so bad in the grand scheme, but it still traumatizes me to this day. When I was 4 or 5 years old, I got head lice and my mom used mayonnaise in my hair. The smell of warm mayonnaise running down my head has made me so repulsed by it that I have refused to eat it for almost 30 years now. Story 30. When I was a child, someone I deeply trusted crossed a boundary that changed everything for me. It left me unable to trust men, even my father and brother. That experience still affects how I connect with others today. Story 31. A large move when you are a child can have a significant impact, which may explain my anxiety about housing and the fear of ending up homeless. Story 32. My father was using cocaine and yelling at my mother while I cried under the bed. I believe I was around 6 years old. He threw a glass object at her, and I remember hearing it smash, which made me cry even harder. It created many issues for me later in life, making me fearful and timid. Now, confrontation and authority figures trigger me significantly. Story 33. My sister has hated me since I was born. She traumatized me in my childhood and well into adulthood. I finally cut her out of my life in January. Story 34. I am sorry to hear about your experiences. It sounds very distressing. If you would like support or resources, please let me know. Story 35. My parents split when I was 6, but instead of being honest, my mother lied to me, saying my dad was working out of town. He never came home, and when Christmas rolled around, I looked up at my mother and asked, "Daddy isn't coming home?" She said no, not ever. I cried my eyes out and had to deal with her boyfriends until she left on vacation during my junior year. She went to Mexico and never came back. She left me with her boyfriend and met a new man in Mexico. That really affects a child, not feeling wanted, loved, or comfortable being myself. I still have nightmares. She acts like I'm overreacting to this day. It was a long time ago, but I hated her for that. Story 36. Watching a kitten being attacked and killed by 2 Rottweilers while my dad almost lost his hand trying to save it was a traumatic experience for me. That is why I will not have outdoor pets. I also witnessed my parents fighting in the car while my dad was driving on the highway. I saw my mother punch him in the face while he threatened our lives, and my sister and I huddled together in the back seat. My sister and I did not get along as children, which made the situation even more distressing. Growing up, I experienced bullying and have suppressed many painful memories that I choose to keep hidden. Many seemingly normal experiences can be traumatic for someone on the autism spectrum, especially without sensory-friendly environments. The dentist was particularly traumatic for me, feeling like a form of torture that I had to endure. Story 37. Every one of my ongoing sleep paralysis episodes and dreams has persisted for 10 years and counting. I am an adult who becomes overwhelmed when left in the dark. Story 38. Not bad compared to other people's situations. However, when I was a teenager, my dad and I were involved in a car accident. It was fairly minor, but it made me realize that my life could have ended right there if it had been more serious. It made me understand that I wasn't invincible and that many people die in car accidents. I am almost 30, and I still do not have my license due to anxiety from that accident, which has made my life completely different from what I wanted it to be. Story 39. I find this situation strange. I was friends with the children who lived behind my grandmother's house. My older brother and I would hop the fence and go through a small field to hang out and play. They had chickens, then geese, and then ducks. Eventually, they got goats. Those goats were not aggressive. They never rammed into anyone. However, I experienced some unpleasant moments with them. I was knocked over by one of the goats and trampled, resulting in bruises and dirt in my wounds. This happened when I was around 5 to 9 years old, and the children would lock me in the corral to observe the goats harass me. If you have ever seen a goat's anatomy, try to imagine being a small girl, around 4 feet tall, in a dress, crying while being pushed by 2 older boys behind a chicken wire gate. The goats would shove me into the fence, knocking me down and causing me to scream in fear, while the neighbor kids laughed at my distress. It was a troubling experience, and I can't help but wonder why I was the only one they targeted. Story 40. Actually, nothing. Amazingly, I couldn't have had a better childhood if I had planned it myself. I was adopted by my Ukrainian mother and raised by her and her 5 sisters. Story 41. We stayed with a family friend who read us a book called Baba Yaga, about a witch with a house on chicken feet that ate children before bedtime. When we needed to go to the bathroom, my sister and I were both freaked out by the clawfoot tub. To this day, I still can't stand them. We rented a vacation rental that had one once, and I wouldn't use that bathroom. Story 42. Let me set the scene. It was summer, I was 6, and my best friend was with me to go boating with my dad and uncle. My uncle and dad were under the influence of prescription pain medication and beer. We arrived at the boat launch, and I begged my dad to let my friend and me sit in the boat while they backed it into the water. My dad started directing my uncle. Come on back. Come on back. Come on back. Okay, stop. Instead of my uncle pressing on the brake, he pressed on the gas and ended up sinking the truck. It caused a significant family feud, where my grandfather had to break my dad and uncle up with the hose. I laugh about it now, but to this day, I cannot watch a boat being backed into the water. Story 43. For more context, I am a 21-year-old male. This happened over 10 years ago. My mother was, and likely still is, an extreme drug addict. Think of the worst drug, and she did it. Besides that, she only cared about herself. She was always violent towards me, my little brother, who is about 2 years younger than me, and my grandmother. My grandmother and I never knew why my mother was so cruel, but she wasn't going to leave me and my brother alone with her. So she lived with us and often endured the worst of the physical abuse to protect us. When I was a few months old, I had an accident. My father accidentally fell on me, which caused severe damage to my skull. Because of that, I have a very fragile skull. When I was 11, my mother was sober for the first time in what felt like years, but she was at her absolute worst that night. She became violent, trying to take my grandmother's bank card, but my grandmother didn't have it. I did. My grandmother wasn't going to tell her, so she just kept saying she didn't know where it was. My mother didn't care, though, and tried to hit my grandmother. I stepped in between them, and my grandmother told me to take my brother and go to the neighbor's house. I knew that if I left my grandmother, I might never see her again, so I stood my ground. Eventually, a fight broke out between my mother and me. My mother slammed my head into a wall 6 times with all her strength and tried to keep slamming, but my brother jumped on her arm and bit down with all his strength. By the time she shook him loose, I got free and managed to slam her into my grandmother's dresser. My brother had blood dripping from his mouth. He has very sharp teeth, and I was very lightheaded. I ended up with a concussion. My grandmother managed to make a deal with my mother that worked out for everyone. In exchange for not pressing charges, my mother had to relinquish all parental rights over me and my brother and had to move out. She agreed and had to leave that night while my grandmother took me to the hospital to make sure my mother didn't steal anything. My grandmother had our neighbors, whose kids were friends with my brother, watch her, and ensure she left. By the end of the month, my mother was permanently out of our lives. It has been 10 years since then, and my brother and I are doing much better. I still have mental health issues, primarily nightmares about those years. But my girlfriend has been there to support me when it is at its worst. My grandmother may be gone, but I will never forget her. She truly was a saint on this earth. Sorry if this is long. I just wanted to share all the facts to avoid any confusion. Story 44. Having a father who actively hated all his children from his previous marriage, including me, he went out of his way to tarnish my reputation and altered the narrative with his version of events. He was also prone to violent outbursts, but only towards us, making it seem like we were lying if we ever spoke out. His lies caused his entire family to resent us for simply existing. Now, I deal with post-traumatic stress disorder from the violence, find it difficult to trust people, and feel extremely paranoid about what others might be saying about me. My world has shrunk significantly. I am not who I thought I would be, nor do I have the life I desired. I try to move on, but the pain of having a father who hated me is overwhelming. On his deathbed, he stated that if he had to do it all over again, he wouldn't change a thing. Just another knife in the heart. Story 45. In 1999, a few days before starting 4th grade, my parents took me to an air show in Northwest Massachusetts, around the tri-state area of New York, Vermont, and Massachusetts. There were small aircraft performing stunts in a field. The last performance of the day featured a father and son in 2 different planes. It was the father's final show before retiring from flying, intended as a send-off after years of piloting. Tragically, they collided midair and burst into flames, resulting in both dying on impact. For years, I had dreams of planes crashing into my house, but my parents never connected the dots. A few years ago, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Story 46. My parents fought constantly. My dad cheated on my mom numerous times and had a daughter outside of marriage. They were overprotective, and now I feel very insecure. Story 47. It wasn't a malicious action, but it did leave a big mental mark. When I was very small and had a stomach bug, I threw up in my bed, which is a normal, unfortunate occurrence for a little kid. However, my well-meaning but misguided parents decided to set up a little bed for me on the bathroom floor next to the toilet and leave me there to sleep for the night, in case I was sick again. I was too young for that. I felt scared to be on the bathroom floor in the dark alone. It felt like I was being punished for getting sick. It cemented throwing up as a devastating occurrence. Since then, I have struggled with a severe phobia of vomiting that affects me in many situations. Story 48. I was physically abused by my dad for not completing a chore quickly enough. I saw him as my protector until that day. Story 49. Being molested by a family member when I was 4 and 5 was traumatic. I didn't understand what sex was, but I knew I didn't like it or feel comfortable, so I told my mom everything. Everyone in the family chose sides. My mom was the only one on my side. I didn't realize how deeply it affected me until I turned 25. My relationships were failing due to intimacy issues, and I was confused about my sexuality. I am now 29, still single and still healing. Story 50. A mother who moved from one extremely violent addict husband to another did everything in her power to condition me to believe I was her protector and had to keep her safe when I was 8 years old. Story 51. We had been going to court for a while. I was about 6 or 7 years old. They made me wait outside the courtroom. My mom came rushing out and told me we had to go. We left the courthouse and went across the street. My mom's purse was in my grandma's car. We were waiting for my grandma to come out when a group of police officers arrived. It took 6 of them, along with the Child Protective Services worker, to separate me from my mom. I cried for 2 weeks in my first foster home and spent 8 years in foster care. I still cry when I think about that day. Story 52. I also had a recurring dream of a red lamb that wanted to eat my whole family. I don't know why, but I stopped sleeping for a long time when that dream kept happening. I still have trouble sleeping at 28. Story 53. Riding bikes with my friend around our small rural town, as we had done for years when we were 10 years old, Two men in a pickup truck lured us under the pretense of showing us puppies in the back of their canopy truck and then attempted to kidnap us. This occurred in 1995 or 1996. We were terrified to ride our bikes around after that. Story 54. My earliest memory is standing in our apartment while my mom was taken away on a stretcher after my dad hurt her. I am luckier than many children because my grandmother moved to our state soon after and took me in, so I didn't grow up in that environment for long. However, witnessing that as a toddler was enough to cause some severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Story 55. Being dunked in the pool has caused me to feel anxious. Now I can't have anyone near me or touch me when I'm swimming, or I'll panic and immediately get out of the pool. I'm done for the day. I don't swim much anymore. Story 56. Being attacked by a small dog, a dachshund, caused a lot of trauma until I was around 11 years old. We moved homes a few years after the incident, and my night terrors and sleepwalking episodes went away. It's challenging because I get anxious around dogs. And it seems like everyone has one now. All my neighbors own dogs. I've had multiple occasions where they jumped on my car while I was trying to leave. One even pounced on me while I was taking out the recycling. I've had dogs run after me when I go to get the mail. No one ever apologizes or checks to see if I'm okay. I now feel anxious leaving the house. Story 57. I say traumatized somewhat lightly here, but I grew up on a farm where we had pigs. I had enough mental separation to eat the pork from them just fine until my dad got a little adventurous one day while my mom was at work and decided to slaughter and butcher one himself, with me as his helper. I think I was about 12. From that day on, I have never eaten pork again. I swear, there was a smell to it that I can now recognize on live pigs, raw pork, and cooked pork. I don't know what it is, but that experience made my body say absolutely not. My mom was so mad when she got home to find a trash bag full of pig carcass in her kitchen and me no longer willing to eat the meat we already had multiple freezers full of. Story 58. I walked into the bathroom to see that my mom's jaw had been broken by her boyfriend, who had hit her very hard. I was probably about 5 years old. Story 59. During my yearly birthday interviews with the local bishops, they asked me sexual questions I had never heard before, all to determine if I was a worthy member of the faith. Story 60. I was 4 years old when I woke up in the middle of the night to my mom screaming at my dad. I quietly snuck my way downstairs and saw my dad, who was struggling with a gambling addiction, attempting to harm himself with a knife. He was unsuccessful, but this behavior continued for years, with him frequently threatening to take his own life. The last time he tried to end his life was when I was 19. They talked him off the building, but I had to drop out of school to work and help pay the mortgage because he spent every penny at the casino and eventually declared bankruptcy. My mom, the only breadwinner at the time, was making no more than $18 an hour, while he was consistently losing his $200,000 annual salary in the casino. We lived in government housing until I was 16. Story 61. Where to start? There are many distressing stories to choose from. I was 8 or 9 years old, visiting my mother's older cousin's house. I went outside to play with some neighborhood kids, and one pushed me down and called me names. I was upset and ran to my mother, but because I am autistic and don't make much eye contact, when I could only tell her the kid's first and last name, she and her older cousin decided I was lying. My mother really wanted to impress that woman and often did so by punishing me for her approval. They made me pick a switch, the stick they were going to use on me. If I didn't select one that was suitable, they would choose one themselves. Then, they had me soak in cold water in a tub for about half an hour. Their logic was that beating me while I was wet would ensure no marks were left. This wasn't the first time this had happened, but it stands out because I didn't do anything wrong, and it led me to stop asking my mother for help if someone else hurt me afterward. This resulted in much more trauma during my teenage years. What really affected me was how much they seemed to enjoy hurting me. If I went into shock and stopped screaming, they would hit even harder because they wanted to hear my screams more than anything. Story 62. My dad had an accident and ended up suffering from tetanus. The doctors weren't doing anything because they thought it couldn't be tetanus. That was so rare. Sitting at the dinner table, I watched Dad try to eat food that Mom blended in the food processor. With his locked jaw, He yelled at us kids, "Stop looking at me." Story 63. It was the 1980s, and we used to visit my grandparents' house every day to play with two siblings, a girl and a boy, who were our age and lived next door. One day, when we arrived, we saw a chalk outline of a small body next to the curb in front of my grandparents' building. We were confused about what it was. It turned out that one of our friends, the boy, had been hit and killed while running out to the ice cream truck. Story 64. I am turning 40 this year and realized I have never heard my dad tell me he loves me. That's not necessarily a unique experience. I remember a time when I was outside playing and my dad was using the weed eater. He accidentally aimed it at me, causing me to scream and try to get into the house. The back door was hard to open. I was about 4 years old. I still recall my dad laughing while I was screaming. Story 65. Grammar school age. I was locked in a wooden dog crate while my dad mowed the lawn. I am claustrophobic and screamed so much that my eyes bled and I was foaming. He thought it was funny that the kids locked me in there and wasn't getting involved. I passed out and have no memory of how I got out. Story 66. Walking home from school and up the street to my house, I noticed the pleasant smell of freshly cut wood in the air, only to find that my parents had cut down every shade tree in the yard and removed my swing set to lay sod and professionally landscape the area. After that, we were not allowed on the grass, and our bedrooms became hot in the summer. Story 67. Realizing that men's and women's bodies grow differently made me feel like I was in the wrong one. I spent years irrationally hoping I would wake up different. My hobbies, life events, experiences, and interactions with my world were all impacted. Don't worry, 20 years later, I fixed it. Story 68. It was not traumatizing, but in a way, it felt that way as I still remember it now, being only 14 years old in secondary school. There was a school trip abroad, and I was in a friend group of 2 other girls and me. I sat by myself on the coach while they sat together, and I felt awful as we were waved off by our families. I smiled and laughed like everyone else, but inside, I felt sad and lonely. It wasn't until 20 minutes in that a girl from the year above asked if I wanted to sit next to her, as she was also sitting alone while her 2 friends were together. We are still friends to this day. Story 69. All I know is I will never do anything like that to my children because it will follow you for the rest of your life. Story 70. I was 8 years old, and my sister was 13. Somehow, we ended up at the boardwalk, and she lost me on purpose. I walked around for hours, crying and looking for her. Story 71. I didn't get off the elevator when my whole family did. I was 5 years old and remember looking up and seeing no one I knew, which caused me to panic. Story 72. Having abusive drug addict parents and experiencing an abusive foster home for a year was very difficult. I would not recommend it. Story 73. Having an alcoholic mother and a father who did nothing about it. Nobody was aware of the situation. I developed schizoid personality disorder and am now disabled for life because I am incapable of trusting anyone. Story 74. I guess this was not for life, but for a few years of my childhood. I was around 5 to 6 years old and was watching the Tom and Jerry movie when a cabin they went to burned down. For some reason, it really scared me as a child, and I became terrified of my house catching fire. My mom would take me to the library, and for a while, the only books I would check out were about fire safety. My parents had to talk me down about fire sometimes because I'd be so afraid that something would catch fire and we'd lose our house. Story 75. Getting bullied in grade school was a terrifying experience where I was nearly choked with my ID strap. Fortunately, I managed to escape and hid in the bushes of the school garden until my parents arrived. They made a significant fuss about it, but the bullies essentially faced no consequences. The school held a general assembly where they announced that anyone caught bullying would receive detention, and that was the extent of their response. The school's ignorance, bordering on tolerance, of such behavior angered my parents, leading me to transfer to a different school the following year. Story 76. My dad struggled with alcoholism when I was around 10 years old, maybe younger. We had a garage-type building behind our house where he typically went to drink and work on things. One particular night, while my 2 older sisters, my mom, and I were inside eating dinner and talking, My dad burst through the door and started picking a fight with my oldest sister, who was in her 20s at the time. It's important to note that my oldest sister is not my dad's biological child, but my mom's. He started ranting and raving about what she was not doing right, which escalated into a screaming match, and he told her to get out of his house. Technically, the house belongs to my mom through her grandmother, so my mom chimed in and told him it was not his house, it was hers. Another screaming match ensued, and it became physical, with my mom, oldest sister, and dad essentially wrestling each other. I screamed for my dad to stop, and he came stomping toward me, absolutely terrifying me. So, I ran to my room, and my other sister started calling emergency services. My dad separated from the fight and went to the hallway closet to grab a gun. Once my mom and oldest sister realized what he had, they tackled him, and the police finally arrived. However, before they could make contact with him, he ran to the backyard and gave the gun to our neighbor. He spent approximately one night in jail, and the rest of us were traumatized. What made it worse was that when we all sat down to discuss the night in question, I bawled my eyes out about how terrified I was. He didn't even remember any of it because he was so drunk. I held a grudge for years because he caused my family and me long-lasting trauma, leading to my anxiety and borderline personality disorder, and he couldn't even remember doing it. I felt envious that he didn't remember. We have a better relationship now, but I don't think I ever truly forgave him for scaring me so badly. Story 77. In 1985, I was speaking to a Swedish girl named Danielle. I was 10 years old and on holiday in Spain when my dad came over to talk to us, which was okay. Later in the hotel room, he made fun of me for so long that it completely ruined my confidence with women. To this day, I have only ever brought a few girlfriends home, an experience I always found extremely uncomfortable. Since then, I have found it incredibly difficult to form relationships and impossible to ask someone on a date. I even had to get married overseas without my parents present. Story 78. Walking halfway through the Mummy walkthrough attraction at Universal Studios when I was 8, I experienced a panic attack. Story 79. In first grade, during the spring of 1962, we played baseball or softball, using bats and balls, with no mitts or masks. The teacher picked me as the catcher. The first pitch went straight past the batter and hit my nose. It wasn't hard enough to cause real damage, but to this day, I pull away when things are tossed my way. My mother decided to teach me math by buying home study books, yelling at me, and pulling my hair. To this day, I recoil from anything involving numbers. Story 80. As a teenager, I was hanging out with a group of people at someone's house where there were no parents present. During this gathering, someone brought up some explicit material that was not from a typical site. I do not remember the details clearly, but I do recall seeing a woman who appeared to have been drugged and was being filmed while being assaulted. I still try to repress that memory because it was so upsetting. Story 81. I opened my front door when someone knocked one night while my parents were having a massive argument to find my uncle, my mom's brother, with a gun in his hand. I was 4. I remember it clearly. Story 82. Seeing my sister have her first child when I was 14 was an eye-opening experience. I saw my nephew being born and immediately knew that parenting was not for me. I then watched her struggle emotionally, mentally, and financially afterward. That was effective birth control for me. Now in my 40s and still without children, I don't regret my decision at all. Story 83. My mother remarried after my father left her. She married a man with little patience or empathy for anyone except my older sibling. Bullying, humiliation, and intimidation were my life from ages 12 to 16. Story 84. A car hit me while I was riding my bike, and when the driver got out, he tried to put me in his car. I haven't ridden a bike since then. Story 85. Being compared to other children made me feel unheard when I expressed my feelings. Instead of support, I was often told to be quiet and that I had no reason to be sad or depressed because I did not have bills to pay. Story 86. A carpenter bee or bumblebee chased me around the yard when I was about 5 or 6. It then went away for a bit and suddenly came back, which sent me screaming into the house. I am still terrified of them 30 years later. Story 87. I watched my dad instigate an argument with my mom in a gas station parking lot next to a busy road when I was 4 years old. I was sitting in the back seat of my mom's 1991 Chevy Cavalier, watching everything unfold. My dad marched to the car, ripped his radio out of the dashboard, and I can't remember which way he intended to throw it, but it was clear he wanted my mom to go after it. The gas station is not far from my house. I could be running on empty, and I would drive to any other gas station. I am that terrified of being there over 30 years later. Story 88. Mine was being sexually abused by someone I trusted. Something that completely reshaped how I see safety, relationships, and even myself, especially now that I am a mother. Healing has taken years, and I'm still working on it. But I've learned that I'm not alone, and that has helped more than anything. I am always trying my best to work on my healing every day. Story 89. My father opened a carton of milk and poured it on my mother while she was crying. My mother constantly cried about my father. She would tell us exactly what he was doing. My father was angry with me and my siblings, often due to his drinking. I asked my second-grade teacher if I could use the restroom, and she loudly said, "Oh, cry me a river." I was so embarrassed when she said that because I was just asking for permission, as we were required to do before using the bathroom. I can't forget that memory. I wasn't allowed to attend social events, clubs, or extracurricular activities. It was just school and home. I think this stunted my development and social skills. I did get good grades, though. When I was around 3 to 5 years old, my mother threw out my favorite stuffed animal and claimed a stranger had taken it. Years later, I learned she had thrown it out because my brother and I would fight over it. It was really sad because I loved that toy. I'm sure there are more memories, but I've blocked out a lot from my childhood. It was sad and depressing overall. If someone posts about a traumatic experience from their teenage years, I can add to that. Story 90. Emotional abuse from a step-parent has made it very difficult to have any type of healthy relationship at this point. I find myself constantly struggling to recognize and maintain positive connections. Story 91. My mom accidentally involved me in a sting operation, and the undercover agent showed me, at age 11, a Clockwork Orange. While driving me home, she got lost, and we ended up in the middle of the desert. Story 92. I often get chased through my house with a knife and have to hide in my parents' closet. I still have nightmares where I die by a knife in many different ways. Story 93. I accidentally hit a friend with a golf club while practicing my swings. I moved away from the crowd, and when he came up behind me, I was so focused that I didn't hear him. Unfortunately, I hit him in the nose and he ended up covered in blood. As a kid, I apologized and tried to do the right thing, but the adults got involved and I got in trouble. I didn't play golf for a while and lost my friendship with him. I've tried to rekindle the friendship, but it was over, and he resents me. Now, I always look behind me before I swing or do anything that might affect others. All of this happened when I was around 8 to 10 years old. Story 94. There was a disturbing website that older friends showed me once while staying the night at their house. No, it wasn't best gore, but all I remember is that the homepage looked black and white and was heavily grainy. I remember one of the girls saying, "They killed babies on here," in a completely casual tone, and it freaked me out. Story 95. My older brother took his own life in the backyard the day before Christmas, and we continued living there. We are not allowed to discuss it. Story 96. Two of my grandparents died close together, one being in what was essentially hospice in my house in the late 1970s, both before I turned 4. I then transferred that to a fear that my mother was next and would panic if I couldn't find her in the house right away. Now it manifests as thinking everyone is dead if they don't answer the phone. I track my husband for this reason on my phone, but people assume it's because I'm afraid he will cheat. That is not the case. I just need to know he arrived at his destination. Story 97. Being punished for saying, "I don't know," when my father asked me why nobody showed up to my 4th grade birthday party. Child Protective Services became involved after my teacher noticed that I was covered in fresh bruises, and we ended up going to court. During this time, my mother had custody of me since my parents had been divorced for most of my life. Even after Child Protective Services took me to our local hospital to document the injuries, my father won the court case, and we resumed the normal parenting schedule. It didn't improve, and no one on his side of the family believed that it actually happened. They kept saying that I made it up or that I hurt myself or whatever else they could come up with. After all that happened, I remember being absolutely terrified during every parental exchange. I still remember the feeling of my heart dropping deeper than the floor, and it would stay there until I returned to my mother's house because I was so afraid it would escalate into something worse. I can't say for sure, but I feel that if that had not happened, I might be much better at making friends. I don't have many friends now. Just one really good friend I've had for almost 2 decades and another childhood friend from middle school that I occasionally talk to every couple of months. I have no interest in making new friends. God forbid one or both of my friends pass away, because other than my daughter and my husband, I will be lonely for the rest of my life. Story 98. My sister had a fixation on my body. I developed at 11 years old while she did not. Every time the family would go somewhere in the car, she would reach over and pinch me. My mom would get angry, thinking we were fighting, and I was too introverted to tell my parents what was happening. Story 99. I grew up in the 1970s and 1980s and ran wild. I almost got into a car with a serial killer named Joe Condro when I was around 5 years old. He asked for directions to the corner store at the end of the block where we were selling lemonade. Thank goodness my cousins were street smart. Later, one day after first grade, my best friend and I watched in horror as the police confronted a man who had been playing basketball with kids on the playground. We were often the last ones on campus since my friend was extremely slow, and we were usually half an hour late leaving. As we walked across the basketball court, the police were questioning the man before they jumped him. The principal ended up walking us home. They thought he was the one snatching kids. He wasn't, but he was creepy. Joe Condro wouldn't be caught for decades. Story 100. My mother never listened to me and has severe trust issues. I'm not exaggerating when I say she has never believed anything I've told her unless there is undeniable proof in front of her. She didn't believe I was severely allergic to peanuts, among many other food and pet allergies, until she took me to an allergist when I was 16 years old. I had untreated asthma until that day and dealt with near-nightly asthma attacks ever since she got a big dog that sheds excessively. Even after the test, she downplays my allergies to this day, claiming to know exactly how they work and insisting that I can't be experiencing what I am experiencing. Story 101. I was about 50 meters away from a church that was bombed by ISIS and saw one of my friends disappear. They used a car bomb. Story 102. My parents always told me not to talk a lot and to be as silent as possible because I felt stupid. Now, I'm not confident enough to speak my mind or make decisions. Story 103. I struggled with eating disorders. I was diagnosed with anorexia when I was 12 years old. My heart rate fell into the 30s, and I was hospitalized with a feeding tube for a month before I was discharged to a treatment facility hundreds of miles from home and my family. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.